So the Indiana Fever are playing the New York Liberty tonight. No Caitlin Clark, no interest. That's about all there is to it. I've not made any effort to really watch the game. I checked the scores; actually surprisingly close in the second half. Uh, I don't know what happened. I don't know what's going on. Until Caitlin comes back, I'm just trying to take as much of a break from this league as possible. It's just absolutely wore me out. This whole CBA stuff, and they can't keep all that stuff under wraps. It's just like, again, look, I'm all for corporations having to pay up. And that, they need to pay up more. Um, though, of course, doing that is calling for socialism, which I'm not for at all. But the WNBA players have to realize, we watch sports for an escape. We watch sports for an entertainment escape. And when they're sitting there talking about the stuff like trying to get paid and having to worry about money like we do in our real lives, the escape factor is gone. And that's the problem with the WNBA. They just leave no escape factor to it at all. It's all about activism and identity politics and all the stuff that the rest of the world's left behind because national sanity has been restored. Um, and again, people are arguing back and forth as to just how much they deserve or whatever. That needs to be kept behind closed doors. I didn't like it when the NFL and the NBA players were, getting mad because CBA negotiations weren't going their way, calling it modern day slavery. I'm not a historian, but I do seem to have missed the part of the history books where the slaves were getting paid tens of $1,000,000 a year. So it's just that league's just worn me out. It really has. A great Caitlin Clark performance to make everything right with the world, but she's not playing, so just trying to stay as far away from it. Didn't watch the All Star game. Been reading the memes online about what they did with the shirts. I might make that a thumbnail. So, more important news, especially for me personally, Ozzy Osbourne died today, age of 76. I've been a fan of his for a long, long time. Back in probably since about 96 when I was about 12. That's when I really started getting into heavy metal music and classic rock. So I really started getting into Metallica, who's still my favorite. But it's about the time I also started getting into Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath. I actually got into Black Sabbath or Ozzy era Black Sabbath before I even got into Ozzy's solo work, which I loved, by the way, and still do. So been a fan of his for a long time. I've always enjoyed listening to his music. It's tough losing him. Obviously, as we all know with his lifestyle, he's pretty fortunate to have made it this far. 76 years old for the amount of this insane amount of drugs he's taken in through his whole life. Just Lord knows how many gallons of alcohol. But it's still tough. He's very real about it. He's very honest about it, and he never really glorified it. If anything, he talked about the regrets and all that. So. But it's just tough losing him. He was, like I said, such a pioneer in the transitioning from classic rock, which I love, to heavy metal, which I love even more. He really had a very unique voice, and I just really can't imagine anybody else singing those songs. After he got fired from Black Sabbath at the start of the '80s, they hired Ronnie James Dio, one of my favorites. We lost him about 15 years ago to cancer. One of my favorite singers ever. I made him one of my thumbnails once, saying my eyes are bleeding from the famous song "Stargazer" from when he was with the band Rainbow with Richie Blackmore from Deep Purple. But even then, it just didn't sound right. With him, as much as I love Ronnie James Dio, it just didn't sound right. Him singing Ozzy songs, so he just had a very unique voice and very, very unique personality, for better or worse. He's not somebody you want to emulate, but watching him in following him was fun. He understood it as entertainment, and he did his best to, keep us entertained. That song "Gets Me Through" is one I always love listening to, where he just comes out and says it. He gives back his appreciation to us for listening to him, and that song was released about 25 years ago almost. And it's funny, for some reason I remember that album being released on my birthday, but I looked it up online, and was in November, not March, or maybe October. So that's kind of one of those Mandela type deals, I guess. But Mandela effect type deals. But like I said, he was between his work in Black Sabbath and his just amazing solo work throughout the years. I mean, he was releasing quality solo stuff as recently as 10 years ago. I don't know when the Scream album came out, but that that was a really really good album. Had some very good songs on it. Um, I can't remember what year him and Black Sabbath released the 13 album, but that was a good album. You don't see bands like that come back together and make an album again some 40 years after they 30 40 years after they last recorded, and it sound as good as that one did. But like I said, just big fan of his. I always had an Ozzy shirt. Especially as a kid, I thought it was part of my being a rebel, but he was a good dude. He really was, and gonna miss him a lot. Been listening to his music since I found out, since I got home. Some songs I'm not ready to listen to yet. Mama, I'm Coming Home, Goodbye to Romance. I don't think I'll be listening to those for a couple days unless I feel like crying, and then I will. After tomorrow I'm off for a couple days. Who knows? Maybe tomorrow night I'll feel like crying and I'll listen to those songs. But all I can say to Ozzy is thank you. He was always a reliable source for entertainment. I can't thank him enough for that. And he gets to see Randy Rhoads again. Obviously, I know. When he first started his solo career, he stumbled upon a guitarist named Randy Rhoads, one of the best ever. Died tragically in a plane crash 2 years to the day before I was born. So sorry, the cat's trying to knock my phone out of my hand here. Look, see, Loki, what you think, Lukes? Yeah. And I know that's really bothered him. He's really, really missed Randy his whole life. So I'd be 43 years ago. He gets to see him again. So happy for him. I remember I really liked the show Jack Osbourne, his son, did with Ozzy when they go around the country to places, and they actually found the original tape of Crazy Train. The first song that him and Randy wrote together and recorded together, and it's like, here's the original tape. Let's listen to it, Dad. And Ozzy's like, no, I don't want to listen to it because it just hurts so much. And eventually listened to it, but seeing that emotion in him, it just showed he just had such a human side. As much as he was the Prince of Darkness, and this just oversized, rock and roll character that nobody could ever duplicate in a million years. Loki, could you duplicate that in a million years? Huh? As much as nobody could ever duplicate that, he was still very real and still very, very honest and true to himself. Again, for better or worse. I guess I don't recommend anybody trying to live their life the way he did. Be lucky to make it 76 days, let alone 76 years. So, but gonna miss him. Gonna miss him a lot. Wish we still could hear a few more interviews. But man, what a note to go out on that final Black Sabbath show and those final shows, doing some of his own songs too. I didn't realize at the time, but thinking back on it, it's like he knew. I think that was his way of saying goodbye to us. And all I can say back to him is goodbye. Thank you so much for the memories. I got to see him live. I should mention that back in 1999. I was 15. I saw him at an amphitheater in Raleigh, North Carolina. It was Black Sabbath, actually, the original Black Sabbath lineup. Bill Ward on drums, Geezer and Tony and Ozzy. And that was a really good show. The opening act was Godsmack. They just released their first album, if I'm not mistaken. And they put on a heck of a show. And I remember, obviously I was over the moon to get to see Ozzy in person. I already seen Metallica a couple times by then, but see all of Black Sabbath and Ozzy in person was cool. But I remember us talking about Godsmack, saying, I think this band's got some potential. And here we are, 26 years later, and they're still doing really, really good. So didn't take a rocket scientist to figure that one out, though. That's a good band. They did a good job, and very fortunate to have seen him live. Very fortunate to have had a chance to keep up with him, and from a very young age. Start following Black Sabbath and start following his solo career. It's just trying to. There's just so many good ones. The Ultimate Sin album, I think, was one of the first ones that I actually had a chance to really listen to and digest. I know Ozzy didn't like it because he felt it was overproduced and he had issues with the producer. And I mean, yeah, the songs are probably a little too glossy, but I think the songs are great. I mean, I think those are some of the best songs he released outside of Randy. And obviously, the subject of Zach Wild was just amazing. Zach's just a great guitar player. Getting to see him play live with Pantera has been great. And, but yeah, I mean his work with Black Sabbath, and some of the stuff you don't even think about. Obviously those first four albums you think about. They're Paranoid, the self-titled album debut, and Master of Reality and Volume 4 are great. But Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, and Sabotage are two of my favorites. They're just very, very good albums, and the ones you just don't hear people really talking about. So, or talking about as much, I should say. And I get it. I mean, those, like I said, that Paranoid album, you can put that against anything. But gonna miss him. Like I said, gonna miss him with all the negativity in the world. For all his flaws, he brought a lot of joy and a lot of smiles. So, thank you, Ozzy. Rest in power, my man. And maybe we get to meet you one day on the other side of eternity. Hopefully, from an Earth perspective, that'll be a while, but I know from the eternity perspective, it won't be very long at all. So, so thank you guys for watching. If you have any Ozzy memories, leave them in the comments, and I'll talk to you guys later.